What's up, guys? I feel like I should be playing these hockey games. It's like all these leans that I have in the hockey games are correct, seemingly. Both of my leans yesterday were correct in hockey and NBA. So hopefully that was some good information. Congratulations to the Dallas Mavericks, who have moved on to the NBA Finals to play my Boston Celtics. Early market read looks like there is actually more of the cash than the tickets on Dallas, even though it does seem like Dallas is also kind of the public side. I expected Dallas to be the public side after beating Minnesota, who everybody was basically handing the championship prior to that series starting, and blowing out Minnesota in last night's game, whereas the Celtics struggled and almost lost 3 out of the 4 games to Indiana. So I was expecting, that's probably going to actually give us some value on the Celtics in game one. Celtics have opened like a 6.5 point favorite. We'll see what happens there. But the market percentages right now, the cash percentage looks like it's actually on Dallas. But after these recent results, I actually kind of lean to the Celtics in that one. But we'll wind up seeing where we go with that and what happens there. We'll talk about today's slate. I have 2 Major League Baseball plays today. Again, I'm not going to play the hockey game, although I'll talk about it briefly. This is Edmonton at Dallas. This is game 5. Series returns to Dallas for game 5. Edmonton won game 4 fairly easily, I would say, to tie the series back at 2-2. Series shifting back to Dallas. Now, Dallas is down from minus 130 to minus 126. So we do see some of the money, or at least the money line, is moving against Dallas. But it looks like Dallas has a high percentage of the cash, 65% of the tickets. So they are public, but 90% of the cash. So it looks like we're seeing the cash discrepancy on Dallas. And I would weigh that more heavily than that small move downward on the money line. Actually, I think we're just getting maybe a little bit of extra value on Dallas, because I think the other home games, Dallas was minus 130, something in that range. And now they're below minus 130. And I actually like the Dallas side here. I'm actually not going to quite do it, but I think this is the spot where Dallas bounces back after a bad game. Even though Edmonton, I had mentioned I liked Edmonton in that game, and Edmonton actually outplayed Dallas despite losing in the previous game. They didn't completely outplay them. Unlike the Florida series, by the way. Florida, even in the games that they lost, I think, to the Rangers, they have been dominating, at least with the shot counts and stuff like that. Florida's been putting up way more shots than the Rangers, although that is what they tend to do as a team. But Florida, I think, at least one of those losses they had, the second loss, I think, was very misleading. The Edmonton loss in game 3, I think, was only somewhat misleading. And I do still kind of like Edmonton to some degree, but in this spot, I just don't think I do. I think Dallas probably gets this one tonight, but I'm not going to actually have money on that one. But I do think it's the spot where they bounce back after kind of an ugly game, coming back home, and it does look like the cash percentage, at least, is headed in that direction. All right, Major League Baseball. This is a Friday baseball slate, man. We had some of these teams off on Thursday. You can try to find some decent spots. One spot that I would think would be decent, but I don't think I can quite do it. And the market read does look pretty strong on the San Diego Padres. Kansas City Royals, they're in about as bad of a spot as you could possibly get, really, man. The Royals played yesterday. They're returning home from a road trip. They're in Minnesota, so it's not like a huge amount of travel. They did go to Tampa prior to that, so it's a 2-series road trip that they're returning home from. Not the longest road trip, but they are still returning from it. They played yesterday in a tight 7-6 loss to Minnesota and used 4 of their relief pitchers, whereas San Diego was off. So, I mean, this is very close to a play in San Diego for me. I just don't love the starting pitchers' numbers against the opposing teams, which is what keeps me off of it a little bit. But San Diego, they're in the much better situation, man. As they had yesterday off, they will be starting a road trip, which does mean they're heading into Kansas City from the Pacific Coast. But starting a road trip tends to be a positive spot where you tend to be focused, whereas returning home from one tends to be a distracted spot because you're returning back into home life and whatever. And with Kansas City having no time off and having played yesterday, I think that's exacerbated a little bit. You got Dylan Cease pitching for San Diego. He's been very good all season. I've mentioned him on this show before. He's struggled a little bit in his last couple of games, giving up too many runs. But his strikeout walk numbers have still been pretty good. And overall, his strikeout numbers are just insane with 82 strikeouts on the season, 65 and 2/3 innings pitched, only 43 hits allowed. 20 walks is kind of high, but when you're allowing that few hits, that's just crazy. He's not allowing many base runners. A whip at .96, so it's below 1. 3.29 ERA. So Cease does appear to be the better of these two pitchers. And I think I agree. I think he is the better of these two pitchers. But looking at his stats against the Kansas City Royals, not quite as good. We have a big sample size here. They've seen him a bunch, and they are 28 for 98 off him lifetime with 2 doubles, a triple, 5 home runs. Does have a 29.6 strikeout walk ratio against him, so that number is quite good. But it's a 286 batting average and 807 OPS. So that makes me a little hesitant. As good as Cease has been this year, and as bad as the spot is for Kansas City in this one, I think it's a much, much better spot for San Diego. Cease's numbers against Kansas City give me a little bit of hesitation, and Walker pitching for Kansas City, his numbers aren't good on the season, but his numbers against San Diego give me a little bit of hesitation too. He's obviously the worst of these two pitchers. He's a little bit older. He's got a 4.31 ERA this year and 1.26 whip, which isn't horrible, but he's obviously, like I said, been the worst of these two pitchers, although a 54 to 19 strikeout walk ratio isn't that bad. 60 hits allowed and 62 and 2/3. The walk number is definitely too high for Michael Wacha. He's definitely a walker. He's walking too many guys. Wacha, that's how we pronounce it in Boston, at least. But look at his numbers versus San Diego's hitters. Man, this is where I just can't quite come in on this because he has actually dominated San Diego's hitters in a decent sample size, 9 for 50 lifetime off him with 2 doubles, 3 home runs, a 14.4 strikeout walk ratio. It's a 180 batting average and a pretty low 641 OPS. So Walker's stats are actually pretty good against San Diego's hitters. So that's the one reason I'm staying off of this game is each of these starting pitchers, even though Cease, I think, is definitely the better pitcher this season and just overall, I just hesitate because of these starting pitchers' numbers against the opposing hitters. And those numbers don't lie, and those numbers are somewhat of a decent indicator. So that keeps me off a little bit. I do still certainly lean to the San Diego side, though, for all those reasons. And looking at the market, Kansas City is a square public home underdog here, with San Diego moving up from -115 to -122 on the money line. So the odds makers are telling you San Diego's the better team here. A favorite on the road. That's just wild, even though I think Kansas City probably has the better record, right? So public's coming in and looking at this and thinking, wait a minute, how is Kansas City, the team with the better record, getting an underdog price at home? That's value, right? We're going to come in on Kansas City. Public maybe doesn't quite value Cease high enough or Walker low enough, I guess I would say, although like I said, in this specific matchup, I don't love that starting pitching matchup as much. But Kansas City returning home from the road trip, and when you're returning home from an ode trip, they're a bunch of poets here. No, when you're returning home from a road trip and you're an underdog as well, that tends to be an even worse spot in baseball for that team because the odds makers are telling you that not only is this team in a bad spot, but they're actually the worst of the two teams too. Although maybe the odds makers are not quite telling you San Diego's the better team, but telling you that this is the better matchup for San Diego, or maybe it's both. But we do see Kansas City with 70% of the tickets and only 57% of the cash. So the market read looks pretty strong on San Diego to me as well. So if the pitching numbers, if these starting pitchers' numbers weren't specifically going in the other direction against these opposing hitters, I would be on San Diego here, and I do still lean that way. The games I'm actually going to be on, though, are, let's see here. We got both sort of in the earlier evening, I guess. Well, one's 7 p.m., one's at 8:10 p.m. 7 p.m., I'm going to play on the Baltimore Orioles, even though I really don't trust their starter here. This is a spot where Baltimore was off yesterday, man. So I think they have some extra rest, and they have a travel. They've just been sitting at home. And, yeah, they just beat the Red Sox in a series, but are they just going to be, like, sitting around basking in that win? I'm not so sure about that because they do have another divisional opponent coming in Tampa. Even though Tampa hasn't played that well, I still think Baltimore's probably going to be ready for it. Baltimore didn't have to use any relievers yesterday because they didn't play yesterday, whereas Tampa, they played a 12-inning game yesterday, man, and won dramatically against Oakland, where Oakland had the lead almost the whole game. Tampa tied it in the 9th inning to send it into extras. gave up a run to Oakland in the 10th, then tied it again in the bottom of the 10th, then wound up winning with a walk-off in the bottom of the 12th. Even though Tampa got out-hit 11-6 in the game, they still wound up winning 6-5. So Tampa basically, pretty much all the guys they put on base wound up scoring. So maybe Tampa got a little bit lucky in that one, whereas Oakland leaving a lot of men on base, getting only 5 runs off 11 hits. That's a bit unlucky, I would say, to some extent there. But all that being said, that was a 12-inning game that Tampa had to play yesterday while Baltimore didn't play at all. Tampa, their starter, Armstrong, got knocked out early. They had to use Tyler Alexander, I think is his name, who's a starter, but they had to use him in a long relief role. And then, including him, they still used 6 relievers in that game. So Tampa, they are not at the rest advantage here, and definitely not at the bullpen advantage either here. And now Tampa, they are starting a road trip. They're going out on the road to face one of the better teams in their division, Baltimore. So they shouldn't be unfocused necessarily, but I think the rest spot is just really bad after what Tampa just did yesterday. And we got Aaron Savale is pitching for Tampa, and there are arguments to be made that he's the better of these two starters just because I think he can go deeper into games, but his stats this season are just not good. A 5.72 ERA, a 1.34 whip. There's nothing to really like about that. And he hasn't faced that many really tough offenses either, I wouldn't say. I mean, he's faced the White Sox twice, the Anaheim Angels twice. So I'd say the majority of his starts are against kind of weaker offenses too, and he's still putting up stats that aren't really that good. 57-17 strikeout walk ratio isn't that bad, but 59 hits allowed and 17 walks allowed and 56 2/3 isn't exactly great. As you can see with his whip being like sky high, and he's allowed 11 home runs, which is just really insane. That is a ton of home runs to have allowed at this point in the season. He's just been really getting crushed by the long ball. And you could say, well, that's kind of like a fluky stat, and that's making his numbers worse. In a way, yes, like his strikeout walk numbers are good, but still, I don't totally trust him. And even though I think, yeah, he's probably the more likely to go deeper into games, than Suarez, who's pitching for the Orioles here, he still hasn't been going that deep into these games, man. He's averaging about 5 innings per start, basically. Since April 16th, when he went 6 innings against Anaheim, he has not gone more than 5 1/3 in any start since then. So that's like 7 straight starts where he has not gone more than 5 1/3, and he's gone fewer than 5 innings in 4 of those starts, which were 4 in a row, actually, prior to the most recent 3. But he's definitely been struggling. And then looking at his stats against the Baltimore hitters, not good. Baltimore's, they have a good offense, and they have really roughed him up. 15 for 40 lifetime, so decent sample size to work with, 2 doubles. Speaking of the long ball, how about 7 home runs allowed and 40 at-bats? That is insane. So he has not kept the ball in the park against these Baltimore hitters. 10-1 strikeout walk ratio is fine. So again, he's got the good strikeout walk numbers, but it is not translated into success. Baltimore's hitters 375 off in lifetime with a 1,340 OPS. So Baltimore has definitely roughed him up, man. Meanwhile, in Baltimore, Albert Suarez is pitching. I mean, I don't trust him. He's a 34-year-old who basically hasn't pitched in the league like almost at all. He had, I would say, about half of a season as a starter back in 2016 for the Giants. His numbers were never any good, really. And after 2017, he wasn't in the majors again until this season. He was coming out of the bullpen for Baltimore. Now he's in their starting rotation, but he has actually had some success this season with a 1.53 ERA and 0.95 whip, 24-8 strikeout walk ratio. That's not bad in 29 1/3 innings. But again, a lot of that was as a relief pitcher. As a starter, he made 3 starts at the beginning of the season, went 5 2/3, 5 2/3, and 4 innings, not facing very good offenses really in any of the starts that he's made either. So I guess you could knock him for that. And then in his most recent start, he only went 4 innings as well against the White Sox. But I think the bullpen situation, given what it is, and Savale not really being a guy that goes that deep into games either, I don't think you really need Suarez to go that deep into this game, really. I think if Savale outlasts him maybe by like an inning or 2 or so, I think you might still be able to get this done with Baltimore here. Baltimore, and yeah, the other thing that they have going for them, I guess, a little bit here with Suarez is that Tampa, their hitters have never seen Suarez before. So even though I don't think he really has great stuff, maybe he has a little bit of an edge first couple times through the lineup just because these hitters have never seen him before. So maybe he'll be able to get in, hold Tampa's offense down a bit because Tampa's offense isn't really that good. Get deep enough into the game and do well enough that it'll have Baltimore in position to win this game in the later innings of the game. So this is going to be a full game play here, obviously, because I think the starting pitching part of it is actually maybe the lesser part of this play here. So Baltimore, looking at the market here, we got Baltimore. They are a pretty heavy favorite, unfortunately. Well, somewhat heavy. They've moved up from minus 140 to minus 142, although I see them public 86% of the tickets and only 75% of the cash, so I don't love that. The fact that they're public and it looks like they have less of the cash than the tickets, not loving that, but I'm playing the spot here, man. And they've moved up, like I said, to minus 142, which is getting into a little bit of pricey territory there. So I think the way to do this is to play the minus one run line or to split the bet on the minus 1.5, where you can get that at plus 146. Do half the bet on the minus 1.5 and half the bet on the money line at minus 142. So then that way you're kind of sort of making your own minus one run line there. And hopefully it'll all cash, but who knows? And then the other game I'm going to be on is going to be on the Minnesota Twins, which I think people might look at this, and Houston still carries a lot of name recognition, man. And they might be looking at this and thinking, wait a minute, Houston, they're like barely a favorite here at home playing against Minnesota, even though Minnesota does have the better record this year. Houston does still have the name recognition, man. So I think the public might still be coming in on the Houston side in this one, and they are, in fact. 73% of the tickets on them, but 94% of the cash I see also on Houston. I'm not sure I buy that cash discrepancy because we've also seen Houston drop from minus 130 to minus 114. So it's kind of some significant movement, moving the line in the other direction to the point where I think we almost saw Minnesota being favored at some points. You have to lay minus 105 with them right now, which still means they're a slight underdog, but not by much. Looking at this matchup, Houston, they're not in a very good spot, man. They played yesterday, although both of these teams did, but Houston was out on the Pacific Coast. They played two series out on the Pacific Coast against Oakland and the Mariners. They finally won a game to finish that road trip against the Mariners, but now with no time off, coming back home off of that, and they used 3 relievers, which I don't think there's much to really take away from that. That's not huge bullpen usage from Houston yesterday, but they played yesterday as both of these teams did. But for them, they're returning home from the Pacific Coast, which I think is a bad spot, man. Like I said, a distracted spot when you're returning home from a road trip and you have no time off to really get your home affairs in order. I don't think that's very good. And they're playing against Minnesota. Minnesota might actually maybe even have a little bit of a chip on their shoulder because I'm pretty sure Houston eliminated Minnesota from the playoffs last year, right? Houston, I think, got to the ALCS and then lost to Texas. So maybe Minnesota is even playing with a little bit of extra motivation here with revenge. This is the first time these teams are seeing each other this season since Minnesota got eliminated by Houston in the playoffs last year. So maybe Minnesota even has a little bit of extra motivation from that. Minnesota did play a tough game yesterday, beating the Royals, but they're at least just flying out to start a road trip here and only going from Kansas City to Houston. So it's a bit of a shorter travel spot from Minnesota to Houston. So a little bit of a better travel spot for Minnesota, at least staying in the same time zone. Minnesota used 4 of their relief pitchers yesterday, which has me hesitating a little bit just because they used some of their better relievers to hold off Kansas City and win that game. It was a big win for them, sure. But I think the bullpen situation, I don't think is really hugely in favor one way or the other here. And I like the starting pitching matchup here. And I could see turning this into a 5-inning wager as well, first 5-inning wager, because I think the starting pitching matchup is actually the best part of this for Minnesota. But I still kind of like the full game just because the situation is bad overall for Houston returning home from the road trip. Minnesota, like I said, did also play yesterday, but they're starting a road trip, which tends to be a better spot for a team. They tend to be focused after that, even though they are coming off of a pretty decent divisional win there. Pablo Lopez is pitching for Houston, and I think he's going to be getting shortchanged here, man, because his ERA is bad this season with a 5.25 ERA, and that looks bad, but that's going to come back down, man. He's got a 1.17 whip, which is not bad at all. A 69-10 strikeout walk ratio shows he has really good control still, really good control numbers, and 60 hits in 60 innings. That's not that bad either. 1 hit per inning, whatever. He's allowed 11 home runs. So that's skyrocketing his ERA a bit. In his last 2 starts, he allowed 7 earned runs to Washington and 6 to Texas. And in those starts, he still had an 11-2 strikeout walk ratio, 32-3 in the month of May. So that still tells me he's got command, man. He's just getting a little bit unlucky to some extent, getting hit a little bit too hard maybe in those 2 games. And he allowed 4 home runs across those 2 starts, 2 home runs in each. So he's got to keep that long ball in check again, back down, which has been his biggest problem this year. But I think his ERA is totally misleading, man, based on all of his other stats that I just laid out. And looking at his stats with both Miami and Minnesota, basically going all the way back to the beginning of his career, or at least back to 2020, his ERA has been in the 3s every single season. His whip has been right about where it is this season, south of 1.2 every single one of these seasons. And he's had good strikeout numbers, good strikeout walk numbers. So his numbers this season are really just a continuation of that, except his ERA is high. But his ERA, again, I don't think is an indicator of how good a pitcher he really is. So I like Pablo Lopez here, man. And then going up against these Houston hitters, even though, yeah, they do have a pretty potent offense. We have a decent sample size to look at, and Lopez has been good against them. 9 for 42 lifetime. They only have 1 extra base hit, which is a double. 13-2 strikeout walk ratio against them. Houston, this says they have these hitters at least have no RBIs off him ever. It's a 214 batting average and an extremely weak 488 OPS for Houston's hitters against Lopez. So he has done really well against them. And he did also face them in the postseason last year, which is the last time he faced them. And he had a 7-inning, 6-hit performance with 7 strikeouts, 1 walk, and no earned runs allowed in that start against Houston in the same venue at Houston. So maybe it's a decent matchup and venue for Pablo Lopez. So I like that. Meanwhile, on the other side, I think Houston's going to be overvalued because their starter, Ronel Blanco, is 5-0 this season with a 1.99 ERA and 1.01 whip. And it's like, people are going to look at this and say Blanco is the way better pitcher. He has a way better ERA. Like, what gives? Like, how is Houston not a really heavy favorite here? Well, dig deeper into the numbers, man. I just laid out Pablo Lopez's numbers and why I think his ERA is extremely misleading. I think Blanco's should probably be a bit higher than it is. He's got 51 strikeouts and 54 and a third, which is good, but 22 walks. That strikeout walk number is bad, man. That number of walks is way too high. But he's kept the hits down, only allowing 33 hits and 54 and a third. So I think in a way that's a little bit unsustainable. You could say, well, he's unhittable, but like, do you all of a sudden just become unhittable when you're 30 years old and you only started pitching in the majors 2 years ago and you weren't a starter until last year? And last year you had a 4.5 ERA and a 1.48 whip with the same Houston team. And you again were walking way, way, way too many guys last year, 28 walks and 52 strikeouts in 52 innings last year. I'm not so sure, man. So his strikeout walk numbers are basically the same this year as they were last year, yet his whip is way, way lower this year so far, and his ERA is way lower. I'm expecting regression out of Blanco, man. Like, I don't think you all of a sudden just turn into some like ace dominant pitcher when you're at the age of 30. And looking at the offenses that he's faced, I mean, some of these offenses are pretty bad. Colorado's, I don't think Seattle's offense is that great, really. Oakland twice. Texas, when he faced them back in April, they were struggling quite a bit. Washington, not the greatest either. Toronto in his first start where he actually threw a no-hitter to open the season against Toronto, but Toronto started the season struggling as well. So I don't know, not to take anything away from that. It's a good performance, but more recently when he faced a team that actually has a good offense, the Yankees, he had like his worst start of the season in that one, walking 4 in 5 2/3, didn't get through 6 in that one. He somehow only gave up 2 earned runs despite putting 8 guys on base and allowing a home run. So I expect some regression out of him. And then his numbers against Minnesota. Minnesota has actually seen him before. Not much. It's a small sample size. 6 of their hitters have seen him before. Probably all in a relief role, I would imagine. But they're 4 for 6 off him lifetime with a home run, a walk, and no strikeouts. 667 batting average of 1,881 OPS. I get it. It's a small sample size. It's only 6 at bats. But these guys, I mean, coming into that, these guys hadn't seen him before. And they were still able to knock him around and get these hits off him. So I think the matchup is conducive to a play here, and the situation also is. So those 2 plays today are the Baltimore Orioles, which I'm splitting half on the run line, -1.5 plus 146, half on the money line, -142, and Minnesota just money line, full game, -105, Minnesota Twins. Let's get it done, man. Let's start turning this around again. I'm slightly in the red right now in the year again. Got to turn this around in the second half of the year. Come on. Peace.